We had our first day of snow.
Yeah, we got some snow.
We're back at home base, of course. And we just wanted to take a minute to talk about the stickers we picked up after Fort Nelson.
Yeah, well, last time we did this, we were in Liard Hot Springs.
Oh, right.
And we showed people what we had up to that point. And now I'd like to show you the last few that we did gather.
Okay, where are they, Brent?
Well, Fort Nelson was the next one in line, of course. Both of those. That's where I'm from, where I grew up. And then after that, we have Dawson Creek. I really like that one, mile 0 on the Alaska Highway. And then, what else we got? Prince George down here.
Mm-hmm. They're just little.
And then Manning Park. That was a really nice one that we only have a few pictures of it on our phones, and that's a big chunk of video file that was lost, and turns out it is unrecoverable.
Okay, well, let's go inside, and we're going to talk about the worst and best highways and the worst and the best RV parks that we stayed in on this fall journey. Catch you in a minute.
Well, here we are inside, nice and warm.
Because it snowed outside.
She's still pretty chilly out there.
Yeah, and wet.
Yes.
Because here in the lower mainland, the snow turns to a nasty little drizzle.
And slush on the ground, and wet feet is not fun.
No. So we're just going to wrap up our fall trip by talking about some of the things we feel need to be, or must-sees. So our picturesque stops. So we made a point of being tourists and stopping along the way to take pictures and all that wonderful stuff. So your favorite stop?
I would have to say it's a couple different places on the Alaska Highway. Roughly an hour to an hour and a half, well, hour to 2 hours north of Fort Nelson. The first one is Steamboat Mountain. It overlooks valleys in a few different directions, and we actually had some footage of a hawk sitting on a draft, just sitting on the edge of the cliff, I guess you could say, about 30 feet out, and he was just sitting there, hovering on the updrafts, and we watched him for probably a good 5-10 minutes. And then he moved a little bit, and then he did the same thing. And, he was just hunting.
I thought he was just playing.
Yeah, might have been just playing, but yeah, it was something to watch. Definitely worth seeing. So that's Steamboat Mountain.
Yeah. I just remember the sun being really low and it being really hard to get the right lighting for pictures and stuff like that, which I do have some of those pictures saved in Canva, where I do some of our
we'll have to try and dig some of those out, hopefully.
Definitely it's in the YouTube video.
The next stop is an absolute must. Anywhere along the Muncho Lake. It's mile 475 on the Alaska Highway. And so that's about 3.5 hours north of Fort Nelson. And it's an absolute must-see. Most of the scenic sites are more accessible for southbound traffic, but there's not a lot of heavy traffic on that road, so it's easy to cross over and find a spot to park and just take in the beauty.
As long as you're not dragging 38 feet behind you.
Yeah, true enough.
We didn't stop on the way up. One of my favorite spots was Manning Park, Alpine Meadow, and the views from up there, which we showed you last week, some of the pictures we had taken with our cameras, or sorry, phones. some really good
Yep.
pictures of it.
Manning Park is on Highway 3 in southern British Columbia, between Hope and Princeton.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I had a panic attack about driving up the side of the mountain up the switchbacks. But once I got up there, it was just a phenomenal view. It was right up there with Steamboat Mountain, and just the views were just fantastic. You'd see in every direction for probably easily 50 miles.
Yeah, it
It was
was
just
wonderful.
phenomenal.
So those are 3 of the
Those are probably our top 3 sights to see.
picturesque, just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk about our RV parks. Best and worst. Starting
Well-
with, on our way up, Big Country.
Yeah, big country campground in Lac La Hache. It's about 7 miles south of Lac La Hache, so between 100 Mile House and Lac La Hache. And that was our first stop. It is a good SAM. We just picked it because it was in the right general vicinity, and I'm kind of glad we did. It was closing up at the end of September, and we were there a couple of weeks just before it closed up for the season. But I really liked it. You could get 15, 30, or 50 amp in any site. If you wanted 50 amp, you'd just have to let them know, and they'd give you a key for the little padlock that's on the extra portion of the pedestal. But aside from that, it was great for hiking. There's a nice, I wouldn't call it a mountain, but a nice hill in behind the park that it was definitely worth seeing.
I went to the top. Brent did not.
I could see fine from 3/4 of the way up.
It was a good workout, not
Yeah.
gonna lie.
Yeah, it was fairly steep in places, but yeah, it was definitely nice.
I said, baby, I know you're on a roll. Sweet honey, let's take it real slow. You know we got what you need.
It did have a pool, and I can't remember if it was open or not, or we just got there.
No, the pool was closed.
Yeah, anyway, it was too cold to swim anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
It was an outdoor pool.
It was a quick stop. It was a one-night stop. We got there, I think, probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and yeah, it was a nice little quick stop. But
Yeah.
I'd definitely stay there again. Big
Yeah.
country campground.
Maybe in the summertime when the, but when it's not freezing.
Yeah, a lot of these places, I would definitely stay at every one of them again except for one. We'll tell you about that one in a second.
The next one we stayed at was Triple G Campground in Fort Nelson.
In Fort Nelson, my old stomping grounds. Yeah, I had a friend that her family used to run that a long time ago, and it's a very large campground. I find they were a little bit disorganized, but it might have had something to do with the short staff and it being so late in the season. I would imagine that place during May, June, July, it would be very busy. Yeah, it was definitely adequate in every sense of the
And
RV.
good hookups.
Had good hookups, solid campground for. We didn't lose power at all.
Yeah. TV
And-
was sketchy. They had cable in the site we were staying in, and then at one point half the channels didn't even work.
Yeah, well, half of the campground got cable, the other half did not. But I know there was some large tenting sites there, lots of fire pits all around, and there was some. They were adding on to part of the park as well, which was under construction at the time. They had a couple of excavators working, and I'm sure that'll be all done by next spring.
Hopefully.
Baby, so take it, move along.
The next one we stayed at was Liard River Lodge. We just stayed there. That was another one-night stop.
That was a one-night stop on the way. We stopped off there, and that's where we met up with all the bison. If you can flick back a few videos and see the bison, that was definitely a must-see. There was, I think, 3 herds of roughly 50 or 60 bison live in that general area, and they're always close to the highway. So it was a good quick stop. They had a little restaurant. We went for dinner in there, and I met up with an old friend from Fort Nelson that he knew some people that I knew, and vice versa. So yeah, it was a good time to catch up with old acquaintances, shall we say.
I said we got what you need, honey. Come and groove along.
Then we went on to, from there, we went straight on up to Watson Lake.
Which was a fairly short drive compared to what we had been doing over the past past week. We were just doing one day. And yeah, it was only about a 2.5 hour drive, I believe, from Liard Lodge to Watson Lake. And we stayed at the Tags in Watson Lake, which they had an RV park.
It was basically a parking lot.
It was a parking lot with power and sewer. And, well, there was water, of course, but the power pedestal didn't work. Or we had 30 amp, and we'd turn on the TV in the fireplace, the breaker would go. So I went in and talked to the kid that worked in there, and the guy that checked us in didn't know anything about it. But the guy that I talked to the next day said, "Oh, well, that pedestal doesn't work properly. Just move your trailer." So I was able to run the power cable underneath the trailer to the next pedestal over, and it just fit lengthwise. And we only blew the breaker once on that one, but that was, I think, might have been a weather issue or something like that. But Tags in Watson Lake.
Just be careful where you park.
Yeah, I would stay there again if I had to.
Yeah.
But there are other RV parks in the area. Some of them were not very well rated, so that's why we picked the Tags. And
it was closest to the signpost forest.
It was directly across the street from the signpost forest, yes.
Yeah.
So that was the main feature that I looked for when I did choose that particular park.
Come on. Rolling on the highway.
And then coming back down, we stayed at Liard River Campground, the provincial campground.
It's a provincial campground at Liard River Hot Springs, and that was, I'd say, the best campground on the entire trip.
The only drawback is it's a provincial campground, so there's no power and no sewer. There is a sandy dump there, though, wasn't there?
There is a sandy dump, yes.
So we basically ran our generator morning and night.
You're allowed to run your generator for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night. Since it's a provincial campground, I was under the assumption that you weren't allowed to use a chainsaw. The girls that were working there said, "Yeah, go ahead," and we could cut up any deadfall that was in behind our site. So I found a couple of logs that were worth cutting up for firewood. There was firewood available from across the highway at the lodge, so I went over and bought some firewood there, and everything worked out great. It's a nice short walk to the hot springs, which we absolutely loved. That was, I'd say, the highlight of the entire trip was there.
Yeah. I think of all the campsites or RV parks that we stayed in, I liked Liard Hot Springs the best.
Yeah,
the provincial campsite. It was
they
beautiful.
have,
It was well kept.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting, but yeah, they had staff on hand that if somebody moved out of their site, they had somebody constantly driving around, and they would rake the entire site, pick up any garbage, clean out the fire pit, and it was awesome. It was so well kept.
Wow!
was number one. So beyond that, we find ourselves in Willow Springs in Clinton.
Willow Springs. It was a little bit noisy. It's right on the side of the highway, just outside of Clinton, BC.
I think it was a convenience thing for us.
It was a convenience thing, yeah. That was where we basically wanted to end our day, in that general vicinity. But I really liked it. I would absolutely stay there in the summer. They've got a nice pier. You can go out on a boat. They've got a little lake right
They
beside
got
them.
the paddle boats.
Come on, and move it on. Come on, said babe. I said babe. Oh honey.
And the office, they had ice cream, which they were sold out of because it was near the end of their season. But I'm not sure if they're year round, but I think they might be, because I know there are some full timers that were living there, so they probably stock up for tourist season. But yeah, I really liked it. It's on the side of the highway. It's a little bit noisy because it's in a canyon, but if you've got lots of rigs in there and there's kids playing, which I'm sure it's a very kid friendly place.
Yeah, there was a playground there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was nice and grass. There was lots of grassy area. I mean, it was a nice.
You probably wouldn't
campground.
even be able to hear the highway after a little while when you're watching the kids, or
It just becomes white noise.
yeah, pretty much.
Okay. The last campsite or RV park we stayed in was Sunshine Valley. We touched on this a little bit last week, that the amenities are great.
Absolutely phenomenal.
Location was great. It was in a close proximity to Hope, so if you needed any provisions, you could just drive the 20 minutes or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's about 15-20 minutes east of Hope.
And
It's close to, I think it was what, half hour, 35 minutes to Manning Park.
wasn't even that far.
Oh, okay. It's
Maybe.
fairly close to Manning Park. And they had a big store there. They had, I believe there was an indoor and an outdoor pool.
Yes,
If you have
which
an
we didn't use.
No, it was a little late in the season. But if you have an ATV, that's definitely a must-see place, because there's lots of trails, great rivers for fishing,
There's also some good walking trails that Wrigley and I found.
and I would definitely stay there again. But be aware that there's basically 6 rows. The first 4 are for people without ATVs. And
People who are just RVing.
The back 2 rows are for people with ATVs.
Come along. You gotta feel it. Yeah, you gotta.
I'm not a big fan of the noise of the RV or AVs and motorbikes and that sort of thing. Although the kids on the little quads, super cute.
Yeah, there was one of our neighbors had a couple of little girls. I think they were probably about, couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, and they had their own little quads.
It was pretty cute.
Definitely.
Anyways, so that's how we felt about all the RV parks.
And that, actually, I'll mention that Sunshine Valley one
Oh yeah.
is a Passport America. That's what led me to that. So we got a
So
pretty good deal on that.
We had 2 nights that we could stay using the Passport America. Beyond that, we were going to pay full price.
Yes.
So we only stayed 2 nights. It was time to come back to home base.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the highways. All the miles and miles and miles.
Yeah, we put on this trip, it was, I believe, 2,800 miles. It was around 4,500 kilometers that we put on.
Mileage on the truck, that where I wrote down all the fuel miles, that's a little bit more than the actual distance that we traveled with the trailer. So we have trailer mileage and we have truck mileage.
Okay.
Because the truck does a little extra more running around when we're in town and the trailer stays put. So the actual distance that we drove was 4,524 kilometers, which is equivalent to 2,811 miles. You were pretty close.
That's a lot of driving in 3 weeks.
And Brent, if he would have asked me to drive, I would have driven. He just got in the driver's seat every day and...
Force of habit, I guess.
Yeah, and then he's like, I wish you would have done some driving, and I'm just like, nope. It's, you know, I would be happy to.
I'm in the process of teaching her how to back up and...
I can drive straightforward. I thought you wanted to drive, though, because of the Alaska Highway. We weren't really sure of the condition is why.
that was part of it, yes.
Yeah. Anyways. He's got to learn to trust me. In the meantime, he can drive. Okay, let's talk about these highways.
Okay. Where are we going to start off with? How about the Alaska Highway?
Alaska Highway is a good place to start.
A lot of people think that the Alaska Highway is rough road, gravel, potholes, washouts, always under construction. That is not so. Mm-hmm. There was a few spots that were under repair, and the paint, parts of the highway didn't have a center line. It was wide enough, so if you couldn't find the center line, well, if it's really foggy or bad weather, that might be an issue, but I've found no problem with it.
Yeah.
The road was fairly well kept all the way up.
I mean, if you're driving at night and with an RV, why would you drive at night?
Well, some people do. Some
I know,
people prefer to drive
but
at
I
night.
think in that part of the country, driving at night is just not advisable because sometimes parts of the roads don't have lines.
And a lot of wildlife. There was a lot of wildlife up the Alaska Highway. We saw bison, elk, caribou, bear.
Mountain goats, mountain sheep.
Yeah, mountain sheep, yes. And there's the wildlife everywhere.
Yeah, I didn't find it. There was a few spots that there was like some tickle bumps and that sort of thing. But I found that to be the relatively good part of our trip.
Yeah, that was definitely a fairly well kept highway.
Mm.
Prince George to Dawson Creek is a fairly good road. I can't think of any spots that are really terrible. It's just a regular good stretch of highway.
Yeah.
With no major issues.
And kind of feels like sometimes you're just on top of the world.
Yeah, there's some pretty good elevation on that trip.
So then the next stretch we did was Prince George going south to Williams Lake.
That is another good stretch of road.
There was that washout just before Quesnel.
There was a small washout just on the north end of Quesnel, going up the hill.
Kind of felt like we were 4x4 for a little bit.
When we were traveling north, it was actually probably it had just been repaired because there were still crews there. It was, I believe, a 20 or 30 kilometer zone for a couple hundred feet. So it wasn't too bad. On the way back, it was almost back to normal. So I don't think that would be an issue anymore. And that's a fairly decent stretch of highway as well.
Okay. Next was Williams Lake to Cache Creek.
That would probably be the best stretch of highway on our entire trip.
A lot of that was 4 lanes.
A lot of it was 4 lanes. I know that north of 100 Mile House is okay, but south of 100 Mile House is 4 lanes and nice and wide. You could see any wildlife coming off in the distance.
Well, they had just finished paving a lot of the road too.
They had just finished fixing a stretch of highway, yes, but that was probably the best stretch of highway, basically from Cache Creek to 100 Mile House.
Then from Cache Creek to Spence's Bridge. The day after we spent the night in at Willows Springs.
Yeah, after we left Clinton, we headed to headed down to Hope and onto Sunshine Valley. But the highway from Cache Creek, where we stopped for fuel, to Spence's Bridge was atrocious.
Do you gotta feel it? Oh, it will always gotta.
I don't know if they were working on certain sections, but you had to take it slow.
Yeah.
Had to take it very slow.
A lot of it's 2-lane, like 1 lane each way.
Yeah. There were some windy sections, so that had part of it to do, but we had kept our speed down because of the wind, and I'm sure glad that it was windy. Never hear an RVer say that. But the reason we kept our speed down was because of the wind, and since we had our speed down, we didn't have any tire issues because the road was so choppy and had potholes everywhere and cracks. It was almost as bad as the highway that we took last year from Jasper into Hinton and on to Edmonton. That one was really bad, and I would rank this one right there with it.
Yeah. So after we got down past the section, Spence's Bridge there, it was just basically your Fraser Canyon, and it was pretty good.
Yeah, it was no problems at all. I'm used to driving that highway, but there are issues currently that highway is closed.
We got back the beginning of October. A little more than a month after we got back, we had what was called an atmospheric river, which destroyed most of the Fraser Canyon beyond from Spence's Bridge to Hope.
It basically cut off the lower mainland from the rest of British Columbia. And that includes Highway 1, Highway 3, Highway 5, which are the 3 main routes out of the lower mainland, including Highway 99, which goes up the coast past Squamish and Lillooet, or Pemberton and Lillooet.
Yeah. And, well, part of the problem is that between the slides, between the Thompson River basically washing everything out as it made its way into the Fraser River, and then the two converging on each other, and
there was massive amounts of washouts, bridge damage,
it was just
flooding in every direction you could think of.
There was tons of news, like people in Ontario and New Brunswick, they had heard about everything that happened here. In Abbotsford, the Sumas Prairie turned into a lake because the dike broke, and that plus they were getting water coming up from the U.S. It was just a disaster.
Yeah,
so
the Nooksack River in Washington State was overflowing its banks,
which happens regularly.
Which basically flooded the Sumas Prairie, and it overtook the floodgates.
Yeah. Well, if the Sumas dike would have not broken, then they probably would have been okay. But with the Sumas and the Nooksack all converging into the valley, it became a lake, which it was back in the early 40s, I understand.
1920s it was a lake, and they drained it for farmland.
Yeah. Anyways,
so that basically flooded the Trans-Canada Highway from Abbotsford all the way to Hope.
Yeah. Well, there was little spots in the middle, but we couldn't go.
nobody could get through.
You could go around.
It was nasty.
Yeah, it was absolutely horrible. So we're coming out of that, and highways are under contract to be repaired.
The Canyon Highway, I believe, is scheduled for mid-January to be reopened.
Okay.
The Coquihalla, I'm not really sure about.
They're looking at the summer, I think.
And the Princeton Highway, which is the number 3, I believe, is open.
Well, they had a slide, like a week after it was opened.
A minor slide, yeah. So that got cleaned up fairly quickly.
And
but that is open to, I believe,
essential travel
only and commercial.
So there's no traveling.
So.
And being how it's winter, you're not going to spend a lot of time traveling anyways. So that's fine. As it stands now, we are not even considering BC as a place to travel next summer. So we're going to leave it for somebody else to enjoy, we might head south.
So we've given you some tips on what's good in BC.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of places to see,
Yeah.
lots of places to go, and we basically stuck to one route all the way to Watson Lake. So you can
Yeah.
fan out in any direction. There's
Yeah.
lots of great places to see in beautiful British Columbia.
Yeah. We did not go on the Cassiar Highway. Brent was not sure that it was a good passage.
I've heard people say it's actually in pretty good shape. I just had bad memories from 40 years ago.
So, and it used to be gravel, but apparently
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
anymore.
But it's probably in pretty good shape now. I've talked to a few people about traveling that highway, and they said it's a little bit longer route, but it's well worth it because the scenery down that highway is fantastic as well.
Well, we'll have to do that for another time.
Yes. One thing I thought I'd point out, for the RV parks that we did stay at, Miriam's going to put the links in down below so you can check out the exact parks that we went to. There is a Passport America, there was a few Good Sams. That's how I basically start my searches for finding an RV park in a general area that we want to stop at. So,
Okay. Join us next week. Brent's going to show us how to operate the furnace and general care of the furnace and the fireplace, how to change the temperature from Fahrenheit to Celsius.
or back.
Or back, depending on where you are and how
Yeah,
you
just-
want to how you want to read your numbers.
Just general operation of the fireplace and the furnace.
So join us for that. That's all we wanted to share with you this week.
Yeah, if you like what you see, give us a thumbs up.
Don't forget to subscribe.
And ring that bell for notifications.
Bye for
Bye-bye
now.
for now.
We got back beginning of October. The month after we got back, we had one of many atmospheric rivers which wiped out most of the Fraser Canyon after Spence's Bridge. And also... Take a drink. Would you like to get a drink? When we got back, beginning of October,